Good morning, everyone. This is the December 19th, 2022 meeting of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force, serving also as the Whatcom County Law and Justice Council. We'll start with the land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people, who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. I'm Stephen Gockley, co-chair of the task force, with my fellow co-chair, Jack Hovenier. Jill, can you put the agenda back up again, please? I'll call the meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is a review of the Council's Justice Project Needs Assessment. We are in this item acting as the Law and Justice Council. And I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Buchanan, who I think will introduce Marty Solomon, working with the group.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Trying to get my camera to turn on. There it is. Welcome, everybody. In the past, the updates that I've given on the Justice Project have been summaries, kind of what's going on. Now that we're kind of in the final couple months of this project, and you have now seen the draft report that we're working on, we thought we'd bring Crossroads Consulting in, who is working with the planning team and very intimately with the stakeholder advisory committee, give some detail and give a kind of a summary of where we're at and in terms of some of those details. So I'm going to turn it over to Marty, and she's Marty Solomon. She's from Crossroads Consulting, and we're really lucky to have her and Holly on this project with us. So Marty.
Thanks, Barry, and thanks everybody for inviting me here to share the latest iteration of the Justice Project work with you. I'm wondering if you're seeing my screen in any kind of normal way. Does this look okay? Yes? No?
We're seeing a PowerPoint, Marty, with the slides on the left column.
Yeah. Okay, let's try this. How's that? Any better?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to just bring up a little piece of business. As you remember, this group worked very extensively on the SIM update, took the lead on that, and
Muted yourself, Marty.
my screen said Zoom quit unexpectedly and everything went away. Okay, so Perry took the lead on the SIM update and wanted to just remind you this is a living document, this SIM, and things are changing all the time, and we wanted to just follow along, keep it as up to date as possible. So the iteration that you saw in your packet has two changes that I wanted to mention. One is that we'd like to change the way that competency restoration was mentioned from the what you see on the left is the old version where it's an intercept 3.
Marty, we lost your presentation, so
Oh,
You're not screen sharing at the moment.
oh, okay, let's try that again. You seeing it now?
Yep, looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So old version is old version is on the left. New version is on the right. And the way we did it, I'm gonna, okay, let's scratch that. The old version has competency restoration program in the jail facility, and that is what was in Intercept 3. And the new version is to put competency evaluation services in the jail there. Because we do have competency evaluation happening. We wanted to put competency restoration services in Intercept 2, where this is not really, there is not enough competency restoration service happening, state funded. So it's a shift. I'll send to Jill what that looks like in the SIM update. The other change is that there is no longer a SIM addendum. We were able to integrate the pieces that were in the SIM addendum that you had seen before into the SIM itself or into the needs and recommendations. So those are the changes. And Perry, I see some hands up, Perry and Jill.
If I can, I just wanted to clarify, thanks so much, Marty, that indeed is, as Marty had shared, the old verbiage that is in actually, if you recall, the SIM is broken up into 3 tiers. The first is the programs that are occurring currently and et cetera. The second is that they're occurring but need support. And the third tier, which is what's being made reference to in A, B, and C. So just a little more clarification that the old language was in the middle or tier B of Intercept 3. And it was also moved to tier C, or the last page, those programs that are not in existence but are recommended. So just wanted to add that piece. Thanks, Marty.
Thanks so much, Perry. That was great. Jill?
Thanks, Marty. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to point out a nuance here where this was included in the packet as part of the year-end report for the full task force. The full task force approved the version of the SIM, including the addendum, several months ago, and that is the current version that is approved by the task force. So Marty's document that was updated is an SAC document. It's not necessarily an IPRTF document. So if the task force, if you today want to approve this updated version and include it in the year-end report, that would need a motion, and we can absolutely do that. That would be a good time to do that. But I just wanted to point out there is a slight nuance to the difference between the document Marty's describing and the reason why there's an older version in the year-end report.
Thanks, Jill. Do you want to pause to do that? Does anybody, like, I guess, Perry, Barry, Stephen, or Jack, who are most familiar with this, want to make a motion about that?
Before we do that, Marty, I have a question. You have on the right column, Intercept 0, community services for competency restoration services. My view would be that that's still a court-ordered step in the process, and that it should remain in Intercept 3. But I don't practice criminal law, so I'm open to other thoughts on that.
Perry,
Yes, and I think it's a great point, Stephen. I think that what our interest was to make certain in Intercept 0, in terms of it being community services, that the competency restoration might not actually occur in the jail facility, But could, we just wanted to leave that open. But certainly to your point, obviously, it has, connection to the legal system and so forth. I don't necessarily have a concern about that being an intercept 3 in tier C, not existing, obviously. But I think that was what our thought process was in terms of community service initially, was that it might not actually exclusively be occurring in the jail. So I offer that bit of history.
Maya, you have a comment.
Yes, I mean, the competency restoration services do not really happen in our jail facility. They happen either at Western State Hospital, or maybe someday they will happen outpatient in the community. We don't have that yet. So the way it's stated isn't really accurate. Evaluations do occur sometimes in the jail. Sometimes they occur at Western State Hospital, depending on the individual circumstances. So the language is not quite accurate either.
Perry, were you going to respond?
Yeah, so just thinking about it a little bit more, the two changes, the new language of competency evaluation services in the jail being added to Intercept 3 Tier B, improving those services. That's what Tier B is about. And then we also added a more general statement of competency restoration services that were state funded. And I think to Stephen's point, it could certainly exist in, because this is, again, programs that are recommended but not in existence. And we wanted to acknowledge that. I'm making reference to the 0.C new language.
I guess
Marty,
well,
go ahead, Maya.
I think, yeah, if we just need to clearly distinguish like inpatient competency restoration or outpatient competency restoration, and inpatient happens not at our jail provides no competency restoration services, none. That's and there it isn't anticipated that they ever will. All restoration services occur in a therapeutic setting, a hospital. So that's my point. I don't know if it was clear from what I said before.
And we were generalizing here in terms of the possibility of outpatient competency restoration, because it hasn't really been formed yet by virtue of the competency restoration work group, that we were going to leave that language general. Of course, Maya is absolutely accurate that all inpatient services are happening at the hospital other than the evaluations. So we were trying to acknowledge the need for this service and, place it someplace on our SIM, just in acknowledging the work that the competency restoration work group is doing. I'm
going to exercise the chair's prerogative here, and then Sheriff Elfo, I'll get to your comment. This agenda item was intended as an update and not an action item. Jill's absolutely correct that we've already acted on a SIM update. And I'd like to suggest that rather than on the spur of the moment, deal with sort of an integrated revision of that, eliminating the SIM addendum and incorporating that in the document, and this discussion that we're having right now, which is valuable, that we come back for action at the January meeting to actually vote on updating the SIM and continue this discussion to inform that decision in January. Let me go to Sheriff Elfo and then to you, Jill.
Well, I was going to just agree with what Maya said, and I don't think the jail is the appropriate place for restoration services. We get backed up with a bunch of profoundly mentally ill and dangerous inmates that are different to manage, and we don't have the ability to forcibly administer drugs that may calm them down and make them more amenable to treatment. So I think perhaps when we consider that later, maybe regionally available to inmates in the jail or some language would be more to that would be probably more suitable. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheriff. Jill?
Thank you. So for the purpose of the year-end report, I think I will put a notation on this SIM pages indicating that the SIM included in the report was current as of the adoption by the task force, and a more updated version might be available through the SAC, just so there's clarity that there's two different versions. If anyone objects to that, let me know.
I wonder if it would be possible to take the addendum off, because that was very drafty and doesn't, yeah, that's the part I would be most worried about is like, but that's the part that went away. So, and just suggesting that maybe the addendum wouldn't necessarily need to be included, but you all decide.
So we'll be coming up later in the agenda, as you've probably seen, acting on the year-end report, and that would be an appropriate framing of the motion on that report from the packet.
Great. All right.
So
should-
Marty, sorry to sidetrack you on all of this. Why don't you go ahead?
I think I sidetracked myself, so sorry about that. Here we go. I just wanted to review the process really quickly of where and show you where we are right now. So on last week, the SAC met and discussed public input. I was going to give you a quick rundown on that public input that was reviewed at that meeting. Today, December 19th, here we are. And we have the report writer, Jennifer Moon, and the SAC planning team are working on revising the full needs assessment at this point. That includes the vision, values, and goals, and the needs and recommendations. And that that's kind of the meat of what the SAC has been working on, along with the IPRTF on the needs and recommendations. So we're going to have a revised version to send to you right after the holidays. And we will do a poll on those pieces, the vision, values, and goals, and the needs and recommendations. Then we'll make more revisions based on the input that we get from that poll and other input coming in from reviews of the material. And we will plan to send the final needs assessment report to you and to the SAC January 12th. Then there's a SAC meeting January 19th, where the group will be voting on approving the document. January 23rd, you all are meeting as the Law and Justice Council, and you will have the opportunity to endorse the recommendations from the SAC. Then we have in here a January 26th date held for a SAC meeting, which I sincerely hope we do not need. And the final formatted, beautiful version of the needs assessment is going to be sent to council on January 31st and then presented to council February 7th. So that's the plan. So just a little bit more specifically, when I talked about the SAC's reviewing public input, for those of you who weren't there on last Thursday, the public input that we're talking about is 2 reports by the VITA agency that is the group contracted to gather public input, general public input, and also input from specific target populations. Those included the tribes, immigrant families, and people with a history of incarceration and their families. We also had a town hall November 15th. We conducted surveys of jail inmates and jail staff. And then there was a little subcommittee that looked at the SAC process through the lens of the racial equity toolkit, the GARE racial equity toolkit, which you all have been working with. And so all of this information is on the SAC webpage, all of these reports, and the SAC's job was to take all of that information and reflect on the vision, values, and goals statements and the needs and recommendations. And I think hesitating to go into too much depth here because of time. How much time do I have, Jill?
I don't believe we specified a particular amount of time, Marty. Jack? Stephen?
Yeah, we intentionally didn't, but I would say we've got a reasonably full agenda outside of this as
Yeah.
well.
Okay, I'm gonna just very, very quickly.
But Marty, we want you to take the time. This is important, obviously, which is why it's first, so.
The thing that I would really love your input on is after this public engagement piece. So I'll just quickly go through these public engagement results and get to the needs and recommendations that I really wanted to share with you most today. So the VITA agency conducted listening sessions and interviews, and they had a total of 29 participants for those. And then they did 8 informal interviews, and they presented 2 reports, one on these listening session, this was all in one report. And then they also did surveys, and that is in another report. So the key insights from the listening sessions are presented here. And yeah, just take a quick look at that. And then there were some more here about where folks wanted investment of resources. And then the survey that the TVA conducted had 1,704 responses. Again, that was general public. Recruitment was done through social media, through ads, radio ads, online ads, emails, etc., posters, and they got 1,704 valid responses. And key insights from those surveys are here. So incarceration prevention is really a high priority, and most support some investment in jail facilities, and they prioritize mental health and substance use disorder services. There's a theme in the report, on the survey report, where they felt like people were kind of grouping up into those who, there were a couple of questions in the survey that were asked. One was, how much do you agree with the statement that I feel safe in my community? And how much do you agree with the statement, I trust I will be treated fairly by the county's criminal legal system? And these percentages show how people are divvying up. So people who agree or strongly disagree that they feel safe was about 37%, don't feel safe, 48%. People who neither agree nor disagree was called no opinion. And then trust that they will be treated fairly and do not trust they will be treated fairly. TVA then used these groupings, how people were feeling, to look at responses to other questions, including like, where would you invest, where would you like the community to invest resources? And they found some differences there. So those who feel safe in the community, and those who do not trust they will be treated fairly by the criminal legal system, had were more aligned with the SAC's vision, and also were feeling like they tended to say They really felt behavioral health services was where resources needed to be invested. People who don't feel safe in the community and people who trust they will be treated fairly by the criminal legal system were more concerned that resources be invested in law enforcement and in jail facilities. This was just a quick recap of the town hall. That was the November 15th town hall. There's summary notes online if you want to look more closely at that. But we had people speak up about the need for a new jail, feeling like Bellingham was less safe, and about the importance of accountability. And then we also had 8 people speak up specifically about the need for community-based services to prevent incarceration. So I think those results on the survey that I just presented are kind of reflected here in these town hall responses as well. That sense of the kind of different a little bit of polarization in our community about how people are feeling in terms of safety and the criminal legal system. The racial equity analysis.
Excuse me, Marty, let me just check. Barry, do you want to interject here or?
Yeah, Steve, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, not talk a little bit about, but say that the town hall, I believe is, or I know that it was videoed. Is it online? I believe it's on the SAC portion of the website. So you can see the whole town hall as well.
Yeah, all of that is online on the SAC webpage, summary notes and the recording. Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in quickly at the SAC meeting last week, there were several participants, including myself, that I agree with them that they didn't think they had sufficient input from victims and people impacted by crime, more people affected by incarceration. I just wanted to add that comment before we moved on. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it is true that the TVA survey did not specifically ask if people had been a victim of crime, and same at the town hall. We had only one respondent at the town, or speaker at the town hall, note their own. No, we had 2 note feeling that they had been victimized by crime. This was the racial equity toolkit questions that this little subcommittee used to look at the stakeholder advisory committee's process in doing the needs assessment. And key takeaways from that discussion are that we acknowledge that people of color are not well represented on the SAC. And there is a lack of adequate data throughout the criminal legal system to even assess how racial equity shifts are happening. And so there's a need for more data for sure. We feel like throughout the SAC process and we have taken racial equity into account and are tried to really integrate awareness and recommendations that reflect that awareness and need to address racial inequities in the criminal legal system. And moving forward, we feel like in the next steps of this work, beyond the needs assessment, but the implementation process, there needs to be more inclusion of people of color, BIPOC communities in the next steps going forward, and ways to measure progress toward addressing racial disparity issues. That's the data piece. So the group came up with a new need and a new recommendation to add to the growing list in the needs assessment report. And that is reflected here. Now I want to say that we got a lot of good input on this at the SAC meeting last week, and we'll be revising these statements. But we're trying to get something in there about what I just said, meaningfully including BIPOC communities in these next pieces of developing actions and monitoring progress toward addressing racial disparities in the criminal legal system. I just want to go quickly now. I'm going to switch over to share with you the needs and recommendations and proposed revisions to the needs and recommendations. Are you seeing this okay on your screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we have sent in your packet the proposed needs and recommendations with red line. The proposed revisions to the needs and recommendations are shown with red line in your packet. The ones that I really was wanting to point out to you most are in the facilities section. They're the very last needs and recommendations in your packet. And these we added to say it's not just a jail that that a jail is not the only facility we need to pay attention to. These services that the SAC has, that the SAC and the IPRTF are calling for in the needs and recommendations are going to require some facilities as well. And we needed to add that in. So this is the part where I feel like we need to be very aligned with the direction that the IPRTF is going in your work and in your ongoing work. So 3F, 3G, and 3H are where I'm focusing. And so there's let's just take 3F. Exploring, the recommendation is to explore development of 24/7 behavioral health urgent care capacity to provide short-term mental health and substance use disorder services. Then we have 3G, research the feasibility and desirability of building a secure detox facility in the region. So a regional facility that would provide substance use disorder services. And finally, 3F, establish a location in close proximity to the jail from which reentry specialists and system navigators, peer support can work. So those are three of the newest needs and recommendations on the list, and seem particularly important for this group to see. There are other proposed revisions throughout the needs and recs, and I just want to open it up for whatever time we have for comments on these and the other any of the other needs and recommendations. And I think I'll stop share, but I'll bring it up if anybody wants to reference the document. So did anybody have any thoughts about these comments on any of the needs and recommendations you'd like to share at this time? Raylene?
Thank you. My question is, when we're looking at separate facilities for detox, that's possibly involuntary, do we have a combination for individuals that have the mental illness portion of it? They're delusional, but there's a detox needed because they're on methamphetamines. or fentanyl. And that's where we see a combination of both mental health and drug abuse needed together. And I don't know if we really have that facility that's together or combined. It seems like they're separate at this point.
Thank you. So maybe putting in here co-occurring disorders, something like that.
Yeah, and I think it needs to be a facility that's not voluntary, that they can, law enforcement can use it, anybody can use it. Because I think right now we've got an involuntary hold, but it's only at the hospital, the crisis triage, they can still walk away. And I think there's people struggling to find that option.
Right, that was the secure detox was, okay, specify that it's involuntary, specify co-occurring.
Yes, thank you.
Arlene, did you want to add something?
You're muted, Arlene.
My experience in working with crisis stabilization for 9 years with both represented mental health and SUD was that in the SUD section detox, co-occurring disorders was the most common situation. For that reason, I included in my recommendations additional recommendations that the issue of cross-training for SUD counselors and mental health counselors about each of the other person's specialty. It was essential for the detox and the crisis treatment. So this is a future thing, but many counselors are doing that because they have to deal with both the complexity of having those two situations to deal with is not simple or easy. So for that reason, cross-training could address it. The other thing that stands out about this report for me is the amount of agreement there is between IPRTF's goals, SAC's goals, and general response to these polls and questionnaires. That is very good and very hopeful. And it means we're on the right track and there's not any kind of important disagreement. The third thing that stands out for me is the recommendation of the 24/7 urgent care program. I am very glad to see that on the list because I know that it will answer the question that many of the emergency services are talking about, which is where are they going to bring the people that they intervene with or have a place to take them for the beginning of treatment and evaluation. So yeah, it's very positive. Thank you.
Thanks, Arlene. I very much hope that there's close alignment with the IPRTF's work, given that so many of you are on the SAC, and also we're just, these opportunities for getting together have happened, like today, where we can kind of cross-pollinate between groups. So that's very helpful. Scott?
Yeah, so if it's an involuntary detox center and it sounds like it's a separate facility, is that the plan?
The recommendation is to research the feasibility and desirability of building a secure detox facility in the region.
I guess if it's involuntary and it's secure, what's the difference between that and the jail?
That it's a place that's specialized for
I
treatment.
know, but why wouldn't you just, if it's involuntary, why wouldn't you just put that service in the jail then? Because if you're there, you're there for a law enforcement reason. That's my core question is why wouldn't you just put it in the jail then if it's involuntary? And that's maybe for a future discussion, but we don't need to solve it today, but it just seems. At some point, we're just, shifting them from one building to another building and calling it involuntary hold, which is what the jail is. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts at this point about the needs and recommendations? Raylene, did you want to?
I just wanted to touch on Mark Fortheis's comment. Sometimes there's individuals that don't need to be incarcerated, but the law enforcement still have a need to put them in an involuntary hold. There are times that there's somebody that has dementia or other issues that might have cross. They might be self-medicating, in which case we need to put him somewhere else first and see if law enforcement needs to put him in jail or in the hospital. Sheriff Alpha or Tank might have more input on that, but that's just a side note. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just agree with, actually both Raylene and Scott made good points. But if the intent is to put someone in jail because they're a public safety risk, or they're in there for other criminal charges, they're going to go to jail. They're not going to go to an involuntary treatment center, but separate involuntary treatment is probably necessary for those other situations that were described that don't necessitate a physical arrest.
Perry, we're going to add this.
I would actually, Sheriff Alpho, made the point that I was going to make, that there certainly could be individuals that are in need of a secure withdrawal management facility, but are not legally involved. And because there's not a crime necessarily occurring, but the individual may be at risk to themselves or others. And so the facility would serve that purpose and not necessarily have legal involvement. But I wanted to add that piece.
In the interest of time here, I'm going to just observe that we're a couple layers into the general wording of the recommendation, which was to research the feasibility. And so these are important questions and important weighings. But as Scott suggested in his after comment, they are for another time. So I'll just ask if there are any other questions about Marty's presentation.
Or if you have any other any comments about the needs and recommendations, you could send them to the SAC email, which is on the SAC webpage. It's sac@co.wacom.wa.us, and love to get your thoughts. So thank you so much for the time to be here today.
Thank you, Marty. And as everybody saw from the chronology Marty showed at the beginning, there's a lot of vetting between now and a month or so from now. So please do contribute your thoughts. This has been helpful. The planning team and the SAC as a whole have been very responsive to the input they've gotten, I think, and will continue to be so. And this will be back before us in January. So I'll turn it over to Jack to move on with our agenda.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks everyone for a robust discussion. And Jill, I think this is probably more you than me to start this out, or would you like me to, I can frame what we're talking about. We've got a year-end report, and we have always brought this back to the full committee prior to submitting it to the county council and executive. And I think, Jill, I'd like to turn it over to you to share a little bit about it. And what we're looking for today is some discussion. And then the hope is that we approve this so we can get it out in a timely manner.
Sure, Jack. The ordinance enabling the task force requires 2 reports annually. This is the second of the 2. The big year-end report is much more detailed. This excuse me, the big annual report mid-year is, has much more detail. This year-end report is simply a roundup of what's been done in the last 6 months and what the plans are for next year. So here's the report. I would say when a vote is ready, those of you who vote no or abstain, please virtually raise your hand so we can get an accurate vote count. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with the copy that people have, Jill. How much is that? I know we had a few, we made a few edits, I think, based on Mayor Cortiz's comments. It's my understanding from the email I saw this morning. Mayor Cortiz, I don't want to say they're non-substantive. I would say they were clarifying. So I don't think they fundamentally change the intent of the report. As Jill mentioned, I don't want to call this the small report, but it kind of is, meaning the more robust report do later in the year, late spring. This is required by statute. I guess where I would start this is to ask if people have any concerns with the report they saw or any questions they'd like to ask prior to asking for approval. And Mayor Cortez, please proceed.
Yeah, I just sent in a bunch of minor edits and my comments are probably for the future. I'm fine with the report the way it's put together, but when I went through it, I just saw some stuff that added clarity.
That's how we took it, and for the benefit of everyone else, we got this lovely email with some great notes saying, I'm fine with it the way it is. If this helps, please integrate them. And thank you for those comments and the time you spent on that. I wish I'll leave that alone. That kind of feedback is really easy to work with. Thank you. All right.
Say, Mayor Cortez, thank you so much. Going through each one individually, I can safely say they were all more Scrivener's errors type corrections in the report itself, and I've already incorporated all of them. If any of the task members would like to see his suggestions specifically, I'm happy to either screen share or email that to you.
Okay, not particularly seeing any hands for that. I think what I would be looking for then is, Mayor Cortez?
I'll make a motion. We approve the report as modified and edited.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So we have a motion to approve the report as modified and edited, and somebody was seconding. I think I cut him off. Sorry.
Second.
And that, was it Tink? Chief? Okay. And Maya, I believe your hand was up, or was it?
I was just.
No problem. Good to see you.
Second.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. Okay. Prior to making a decision, is there any discussion of this motion? All right.
Here again, there was mention earlier about removing the SIM addendum. Is that something that the task force wants to do? Please let me know about that.
It's currently included, correct, Joe? So given that there was no discussion to remove it, my perception would be that we leave it as is, because I didn't see any amendment or any request to do that. Perry?
Yes, in working with Marty, one of the things that's happened with the addendum that was originally developed by the behavioral health gap analysis team, just to make sure and capture items that people were making reference to and et cetera, that those items were actually moved to the SIM itself or other components. And so essentially at this point, I don't know how crucial it is, but the addendum is no longer really a viable document. The components of that, as they've been integrated into other aspects of the SIM and the needs and recommendations document. So I just wanted to bring that piece of information in. Marty may have left the meeting at this point, but that was the original hope and initial hope that the addendum would no longer be included.
Okay, well, Perry, given you've got that knowledge, and I think I heard you say it's no longer viable, would you be proposing then that we remove it? Is that, I believe, what you're saying?
I am. Thank you, Jack. I am making that recommendation.
All right. So, and Mayor Cortez, if you're in agreement, why don't we amend the motion, your original motion, to have the report with that portion removed based on Perry's comments? Would that be acceptable to you?
That's fine.
And Tank, is that okay with you since you seconded it? Great. Okay. So the motion is to approve the report with the no longer viable SIM portion removed. Is that accurate enough language, Jill, for you to capture in the minutes? Great. Okay. Yep. And I see one more. I see a hand. Mike,
Hi, I'm here proxy for Greg Winter today, and I do have a question about that. It seems like if I understood Marty's presentation correct, the items in the SIM agenda were added to an updated SIM. Is that correct, Perry? And that's why the SIM is no longer viable and needed. My question of clarification is, we have a SIM that I believe the task force adopted, was created when that addendum was still viable, and those items weren't in that SIM. So I just want to clarify that the SIM that was adopted by the task force doesn't need that addendum, I think that's what we're calling it, the SIM addendum. Could you clarify that, please, for me, Perry? Because I know we tabled making more substantive changes until we could talk about that, and as Stephen mentioned in our January meeting.
Mike, I'll have Perry clarify, but I think where we are from the discussions I've heard is the SIM is somewhat in progress right now, and to submit it as is to council wouldn't really reflect what it is. So while I think in no way are we trying to abandon or not use it, we aren't in a place where sending the one we have would be appropriate in the report, is I think what I've been hearing through the various discussions, but I'll let Perry clarify.
So I would agree with that. There's two different documents. One, Marty obviously talked with us and brought the updates to the sequential intercept model. There was also another component that the behavioral health gap analysis team had originally worked on that we referred to as the addendum. They were items that were brought up and but did not fit on the SIM as a service that was in existence, was in need of additional resources and support, or was not in existence. A lot of it honestly had to do with relationships, further developing systems and those sorts of things. And so what we did with the addendum document, not to be confused with the SIM, was we integrated that information from the addendum document into the SIM itself, and also into the needs and recommendations component. So that's where the document that I'm saying is no longer viable was the addendum document itself.
I think I mostly followed that, but just to clarify my own understanding, that means that all of those things in the addendum are in the SIM that the task force has adopted.
I would say, there was some that were, a recommendation that there was a review of a document or a systems change that occurred, and we did not include that level of detail in the SIM itself, but included it in the recommendations as reflected in the recommendations and needs document. And it's interesting because there's kind of two of those sort of occurring. One is with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and that needs and recommendations document. And so I wouldn't want to say, Mike, that yes, 100% of the language was actually put into the SIM as much as it was put into the needs and recommendation document or the SIM.
I must admit being a little bit lost. I don't think this is super material, but here's my basic concern is that when we adopted the SIM, I believe it was in the summer, Jill can correct me, I think it was July, when the task force voted to approve it, it contained a certain format. And I think there's been some adjustments to that. And we're saying goodbye to one, we haven't fully adopted the other. I just want to make sure that we're minding our P's and Q's. This is really more procedural than anything else. I'm not overly worried about content. I remember what was on it, but I do care about process. And I just want to make sure we're doing it correctly. And I'll defer to Jill on that, my assumption there about the adoption of the SIM.
Please go ahead, Jill.
Thank you. I'd like to screen share the notation that I made in the reports. If I could do that right quick, let me make sure I get the correct one pulled up. Okay, do you see the report, this bottom section here, the SIM service inventory? This is the notation that I've made. If you think this is adequate to cover the concerns about the two different versions, then
Jill, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
Any other questions? Yes, Heather.
Good morning, Heather Flaherty, citizen representative. Just going through the report, I didn't notice, and I could have missed it, if the Vera report update was part of the 2023 what's next, and if that's something that we are going to do, or if this task force will have a role in that at all, and what the where the discussions are right now on that updated, here's what we've done with the programs Vera recommended, and here's the change in the data that they've shared regarding who's being held pre-trial and things like that.
And Barry, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I can partially anyway. I know Deputy Executive Schroeder and I talked a little bit yesterday about kind of a process that we could put together to do exactly what Heather's talking about, some sort of a review that checks the boxes that we've done that relative to that Vera report. So the answer to your question, Heather, is yes. We don't have anything definite yet. We're in the process of kind of looking at brainstorming some scope and what might go onto an RFP. So that's kind of being done now through some discussions. So the answer is largely yes.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, seeing no hands, I'm going to ask that we make a decision. So what I will do is, and Jill, I can ask for voice votes if I ask for abstentions and negatives, correct? Or abstentions and no's or cons.
Yes, if you want to carry normal voice vote of ayes, and then just ask that the people voting no or abstaining
Perfect, great.
raise their hand, that would be great.
Zoom's always a little more challenging in this, and I don't want to use thumbs and hands because some people can't find them. And all right, so if you could please unmute. All in favor of the motion to approve the report, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no. And does anyone wish to be recorded as an abstention? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Does anybody disagree with that? The motion passes unanimously, and Stephen, I will turn it back over to you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
And I should have said for all who were voting members, but I assume everybody knew that or were a proxy, so I apologize for not clarifying that up front.
Thank you, Jack. The next agenda item is review and discussion and potentially action on a list of legislative priorities with regard to behavioral health services. I'm going to provide some very brief background on this. Mike Parker is here and has been integral in this process, and Arlene is here and has been involved as well. So I welcome their input to the discussion. In the October meeting of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee, both Joe Valentine, the administrator of the North Sound Behavioral Health Administrative Services Organization, which oversees mostly community-based behavioral health services in the 5-county region, presented to the committee along with Representative Alicia Rule, who, as you know, is herself a behavioral health professional and has taken a very active interest in behavioral health support issues in the legislature. In the course of that discussion, Representative Rule invited the committee to develop what she informally called a wish list for her use to carry forward into the legislative session and try to promote the needs that the Behavioral Health Committee had identified and was discussing with her in that meeting. The committee decided to form a small subgroup to develop a list along the lines of discussions that had been had. That group consisted of Mike Parker, Arlene, myself, Jackie Mitchell, Courtney Taylor, a behavioral health specialist from the Public Defender's Office, and Brian Estes, who's a member of the committee and a board member of NAMI, Washington. The list that came out of that was hashed over, revised, and approved by the committee. presented to both the Behavioral Health Committee and to the Legal and Justice Systems Committee at a joint meeting they held in, I'm going to say early this month. And it was endorsed by those two committees. We had scheduled a meeting with Representative Rule. We wanted to meet with her and talk through some of these issues prior to the legislative session so that she could hit the ground running, since actually a lot of work, as most of you know, starts happening before the session actually convenes formally. And so the timing of all of this didn't allow for it to come before the task force. In the course of those preparations, we also had contact with Senator-elect Sharon Shoemake, who was interested in understanding the priorities so that she might act on our behalf in the Senate in the coming session as well. A session was scheduled with Senator Shoemake as well. You received an almost final draft of those priorities in your packet. There have been some slight revisions made since then, and discussions were had with Representative Rule and Representative Shoemake. We made very clear that these were endorsed by the two committees, but not yet endorsed by the task force as a whole. We had some good discussions. I might let Mike and Arlene summarize those, but just to very briefly summarize the priorities, we had four. The first was to secure ongoing non-budget proviso funding for operational costs at the Crisis Stabilization Center, the Ann Deacon Center for Hope. That had been a longstanding concern of the county and of the contracted providers serving the residents of the Crisis Stabilization Center. The second was to target reimbursement rate increases for behavioral health services that benefited direct service providers and prioritize services for people who were in diversion, treatment, and reentry programs in relation to county criminal legal systems. That came from Joe Valentine's observation that an increase of 7% in behavioral health funding in the prior session, the 2022 session, had largely been reduced through titrating through the layers of bureaucracy to very little increase in the reimbursement rate for direct services providers. So we wanted to ask that they look for ways to target money on the actual people providing those services. This is a huge disincentive in the workforce area for behavioral health services that the committee has been talking about for quite a while. The third was in response to an observation that there's very limited contracted capacity for the jail provision of psychiatric prescription medication. There's long waits to be seen by a prescriber. There are limited people available to prescribe, and nobody is well served by that. Jail staff, the court system, or the individuals who require medications themselves. So that was number 3 in our priorities. And number 4 was to explore and provide adequate funding for an expansion and the development of local competency restoration programs that would likely be on an outpatient basis. Right now, as everyone knows, for several years, despite the mandate of the True Blood settlement, competency restoration services have been bottlenecked by lack of capacity at Western State Hospital and the delays that imposes on the court system and case progression in our courts and in our jails. So those were the 4 items. Mike and Arlene, I'd welcome any additional comments you have about the process that have brought us to this point. I think ultimately we're going to ask for both discussion and an endorsement in general concept of the priorities so that we can report back to Representative Rule and Senator-elect Shoemake so that they know the status of those from our discussions. Mike and Arlene? Mike?
Stephen, I don't have much to add. That was a brilliant summary of the entire piece. So there's not much to add. I would just say process-wise, if these things sound familiar to the task force, they should. These really have come about through a really year-long discussion in a couple of forums, both in the behavioral health subcommittee. I think the task force as a whole has seen some of these. Those involved in behavioral health gap analysis and the recommendations from that group. There's a lot of congruency. That was our point. So if these sound maybe rote, or if these sound like we're banging the drum, we felt that these were things that needed to be addressed outside of what we can do locally under our control. And Stephen did a really good job when we were speaking with our legislators on framing that issue, that in areas where the task force and we have control on local issues, we're pretty comfortable navigating those. But these are really things that we need state action on. And I would just offer that I think for the task force to be able to take these concerns and these items that come up in our committees and to have them move forward is really kind of it's excellent. It's outstanding. And I think it's a good place to take those things that you can't fix in front of you on your own. So Stephen did a great job. He led both of us, both groups, in talking with our legislators. And I, for one, as a behavioral health subcommittee co-chair, I'm really pleased to be able to see that we have a venue to take these observations, to take these learnings in the work of the task force and make something happen. So Stephen, thank you for leading us through that. I think they're extremely well done. And I would just offer, if you didn't see your #1 behavioral health, champion item on there, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. And invite those, if you're in a subcommittee, to be involved in that, please do weigh in, because we want to continue the conversation, and both legislators were quite warm to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just build on Mike's comment that we were very pleased at the positivity, interest, and background knowledge that both of our elected representatives evidenced. Both of them asked very good questions, very practical questions, so that we could see that the general issues that we were putting forward as priorities were getting some traction in their mind, and they were thinking about what information they needed to move them forward in the legislature. So both of them had questions for us that we weren't quite prepared to answer in detail. And so there was agreement, #1, that this was the beginning of an ongoing exchange with them. #2, that we would come back and do some homework, find answers to their questions, and deliver that to them. Some of them had to do with how many dollars are you talking about? Not an unreasonable question. So I was encouraged that this seems to be the beginning of working with our legislators, and I know it's been maybe 2 years since we articulated the conclusion that we probably needed at various appropriate points to become advocates for some of the changes we wanted to implement, and here we were actually able to do that and getting a constructive reception from the people we were talking to. Arlene, any further thoughts from you?
No, that's very good coverage. I think it's our good fortune that we have such caring representatives and agreement and support that they have for one another, including Lakonoff and Rammel, and taking that even further into the state legislature. The odds for getting some action and funding on these priorities is high. This is wonderful.
So to open up to the task force for any questions or discussion about those, and absent that or after that, I'd welcome a motion to endorse the legislative priorities as you saw them. I'll also add that the refining of those priorities came from a much longer list of issues that we had identified. That list, Arlene is the archivist for that list. And so that's a working list for the Behavioral Health Committee. And it will continue to put forward ideas that require more systemic action as we go forward in the future. So we're not losing track of a lot of good ideas that the committee discussion engendered. We're just trying to target a few discrete, most urgent things for us to move forward on some of our efforts. I don't see any hands for discussion. Is there anyone who wants to move action on the legislative priorities for behavioral health issues?
Stephen, so moved.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Mike and seconded by Barry to adopt the priorities. Mayor Cortez.
Yeah, one quick question. You mentioned that you gave them dollar ranges maybe for what these might cost. I'd be interested. You didn't.
No, we didn't. That's what they wanted. So,
Okay.
so we're going to be working on that.
Okay, because I'd be interested in that as well. Thanks.
Of course, of course. Other questions or comments?
Stephen, I just want to let you know, I've got Jackie Mitchell and our attendee. She's got her hand raised. I'm going to give her talking permissions. Jackie, you should be able to speak now if you want to comment.
Yeah. Hey, Stephen, I'm sorry. And thank you. That was a great overview. And thank you for going over those points. I know that competency one kind of got snuck in at the last minute, and I didn't notice that it was basically asking for statutory authority, which we already have. So I think there was some mention of that in between. And so is there also some discussion about just turning that into adequate funding to resource outpatient competency, that kind of thing? Because, you know, sorry, that one just snuck by me.
No, that's okay. I made the general comment, so I'll refine it here. My general comment was that you were seeing a near final draft in your packets. We had that same discussion. Perry brought up the existence of authority already. And so we took that out, and that number 4 priority simply addresses adequate funding for local competency restoration services. So you're exactly right, Jackie. Thank you for catching that.
No, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, then I'll ask everyone to unmute again. We have a motion to adopt the legislative priorities for behavioral health services as they've been presented to Representative Rule and Senator-elect Shoemate. And I'll ask for a voice vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, say no. And anyone who wishes to abstain, please say abstain. Okay, the motion passes. The priorities are endorsed. Thank you, everyone. And Jack, back to you.
Yeah, and we are now going to look at the calendar for next year. So Jill, I assume you probably want to put that up on the screen, would probably be the easiest.
Sure, I can screen share the calendar. I just want to make sure everyone's aware that we have an updated version. I received the City Council's final meeting calendar for 2023 and needed to adjust a few of our dates around that. So if you can see what I'm screen sharing now, the highlighted changes are what the new calendar would be. Arlene, you have a question?
Yeah, a question on the date for February 17, which on my calendar looked like a Friday.
February 27.
Oh, no, it says 17.
I think you mean the steering committee.
For
you're referring to.
steering, yeah, steering,
Oh, okay, then that would be the day before then, February
16.
16th. Thank you, Arlene.
Okay.
I'm going to interject a question to Barry. The change of the January meeting may have some significant impact on the interplay with the SAC process. And I would ask Marty as well if she were still on. Barry, what are your thoughts about that?
So Stephen, what's specific, ask your question again. Which meeting are you concerned about?
The January task force meeting was scheduled for January 23rd, and that was what Marty showed on her chronology.
Oh,
That-
yeah. I think if we could do it on the 23rd, that would be better.
I did note on Marty's chronology, she did include January 30th as a possible alternative for the task force meeting. So I can change it back to January 23rd, if you like.
What was the reason for the change to the 30th in the first place, Jill?
Bellingham City Council meets on the 23rd, and so it's often difficult for them to attend Monday morning meetings. Dan specifically. So Dan, if you want to comment on that, that might be helpful. Or not.
Can you repeat that, Jill?
Right, we're talking about the January full task force meeting. Our choice for dates are the 23rd, which is a city council meeting, or the 30th.
Yeah, if we could make it off the city council meeting date, that would be better.
Okay. Another option is for the task force to approve the calendar as is and just leave the 23rd or the 30th flexible according to what we need to do. These aren't necessarily set in stone. We can change the regular meeting calendar.
So Jill, I think that's fine. I think we can work, offline with the planning group to validate that and make sure that we think we can get everything turned around correctly from that 30th meeting. That would be the concern if there's comments on the plan to get that done before, because it has to go to council the next day, the 31st. So
Okay, sure. So if in approving the calendar, you just, the group today wants to just note that the January date is flexible for the full task force, that would be great.
All right, given that discussion, prior to approving this, does anyone have any other questions, comments, concerns, or Scrivener's errors that we notice?
Can I just interject real quick here?
Yes, of course.
So is the rub on the late January meeting in relation to the SAC recommendation to the county council? Am I reading that correctly, or is that not true?
that's what I was talking about, Dan. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is.
It has to go to the packet has to go, has to go to the council office on the 31st to get in the packet for the meeting.
Okay. Then it's fine. Go ahead. Let's just go ahead and do the earlier date, so that way there's ample time. I don't want to be the sole person that's holding things up.
Great, thank you, Dan. So January 23rd for the full task force still stands.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
Yeah,
of
thanks,
course.
Dan and everyone. That's something we did discuss, that if possible, we wanted a little bit of time for this group to discuss as Law and Justice Council, those SAC recommendations. It seems pretty important, so that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so with that change to the 23rd and the change of February, just correcting that date, 16th. Was there anything else, Jill? Okay, so I think those are the only two modifications. All
Well,
right. Oh,
as shown on the screen.
as shown on the screen, correct. As shown, yeah. There's a lot of modifications, but as shown on the screen, the two modifications under steering, February 17th is actually February 16th, and we will retain the January 23rd date for the full task force. All right, with those, would someone like to make a motion to accept the 2023 regular meeting schedule calendar?
So
Second.
Did you catch that, Jill? Because I'm not sure who did what.
Yes, Councilmember Buchanan motioned and Councilmember Hamel seconded.
Great. Okay, any discussion? All right, please unmute. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, please say no. Anyone abstaining, please indicate that through voice or hand. Seeing no no's and no abstentions, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, everyone. And I just want to give everyone a heads up that the week between Christmas and New Year, I'll be building these meetings into the Outlook calendars. So expect a big dump of Outlook invitations in your email that week. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jill. And if we could get the full task force, the one that captures the 23rd ASA, the next week would be great, but I would say get that one out first. So, or maybe people could just note their calendar, might be simpler, but just if you could block that 23rd date would be great. All right, Stephen, I think, let me get my agenda back. Okay, we're on committee updates. I guess I'll start with steering, and then I'll give you joint behavioral health. Does that sound okay?
Yep.
All right. And by saying I'll start with steering basically means I'm calling on Barry and calling on people who have questions. Councilman Buchanan, would you like to talk about the steering committee meeting?
Yeah, well, a couple of things that we looked at last steering committee meeting. We talked about the meeting that I had with Perry Mowry with the folks down in King County on one of their diversion programs out of their prosecutor's office. We discussed whether or not to bring that before the task force, and we thought it was maybe a little too soon for that. So we're going to hold on that. But the council is going to be investigating and looking into that probably the first quarter of the year. So other things that we did, you're just going to have to remind me, my mind's kind of overflowing with SAC stuff. But, obviously we approved what we talked about today. What else did we do, guys? Jack, we usually cover everything.
Yeah, I know, but remember, I was gone.
Oh, you were gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what the minutes said maybe, but I'll
Stephen.
for people who actually attended.
Well, I thought it was almost all SAC stuff.
It really was, yeah.
But Jack, if you found other things in the minutes that deserve mention.
No, I didn't say you needed to be called out.
Well, thanks for backing me up, guys. Yeah, it was primarily SAC stuff, and you heard from that, some of the results from that work today. So really, steering committee is just trying to stay focused on what to bring before the task force, and we look forward to a robust and productive 2023. So thank you.
And Barry, would it be appropriate just to remind anyone here, particularly if you're somewhat new to the task force, if you have topics, concerns, things that you think need to be discussed here that aren't, there's several ways to do that, but a great way would just be to send an email to Barry, who's the chair of the steering committee, and it can be discussed there. And it's an open meeting. You're welcome to attend. And that's probably the most effective way to put things on the agenda here.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah. Okay. Stephen, over to you.
Okay. The final committee update is from the joint meeting of the Legal and Justice Systems and Behavioral Health subcommittees. I'll turn it over to Raylene and Mike as the co-chairs.
Thank you. We had a robust conversation on the 988 mental health crisis line and how that is able to affect tribal members as well as others. We also discussed the competency evaluation and restoration work group that Perry commented on, and some behavioral force items. Mike, do you want to add more to that?
So really a really great summary. The behavioral workforce issues we mostly framed up in terms of those that would be in that work group that you've already heard about for the behavioral health wish list, if you will, for a representative role. But no, you covered it really well. Thanks, Raylene.
For people who haven't seen the meeting summary, the 988 discussion was maybe worth a touch more detail. There were several representatives from Volunteers of America, which has the contract for 988, which is the new suicide prevention line, distinct from 911. And also has some supplemental behavioral health and information and referral services. There were 2 staff members of VOA working on the line who were themselves Indigenous professionals, and the ability of those services to access and respond to the needs of Native communities, I think the committee found very noteworthy and very welcome expansion of the behavioral health system in Washington State.
Another item, Stephen, since you went down the whole a little bit, that also I think was well met by the joint committees was the ability to do follow-up. You know, in the past, the crisis line really couldn't do follow-up. But in the North Sound, they can do follow-up. So if officers or behavioral health workers or anybody has a concern about somebody, they can do a call out, number one. But number two, if they've used that crisis line and can use some follow-up, there is some ability to do that. So I would exhort people, if you haven't seen that or aren't familiar with 988, the presentation was really solid. And I think all of that is captured, right, Stephen, on the video of the event, so you could catch the training, and it was very well done.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Arlene, do you have anything to add from your co-chair position?
No, thank you.
Okay. Dan.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right venue to talk about this, but as it relates to the dispatch portion of 988, so that goes to a different system that's not in Washington State. There will be a local alternate response team dispatch. Well, there is actually a person that works at Watcom that provides that service. And I don't know if Sheriff Alfo, if you wanted to comment on the meeting that happened in between the joint meeting and today, which was the Watcom board meeting, in terms of staff concerns in terms of shortages, vacancies, and such, that is almost kind of similarly being, well, definitely similarly being felt by our Bellingham Police Department in terms of shortages there, and the interplay between that concern and upcoming alternate response team dispatch. Or if Lieutenant Cristalli wanted to comment on that.
I was at the meeting, and I'll just say that it was very well explained about the severe inability to retain or recruit people, the length of time it takes to train people to be effective 911 operators, and some of the issues with current salary and differences between what other comparables are paying, and a failing facility, then the demoralization of the people that work there, and really people's lives depend on them. They did mention they had a mental health person there that was assisting with screening calls, but that's only one person for 40 hours a week. So, but I think Lieutenant Cristelli would probably be far more better presenter on what's the going on inside the Bellingham Police Department. I know he's anxious to speak to.
Thank you, Sheriff. I've certainly heard the same things at dispatch. We do have our staff meetings where Allison's involved. This is the dispatch director. So, to that, certainly we appreciate the time that essentially MCOT person is there that can take some of those calls. How that's transferred, what calls go to the essentially the alternative response team or pre-alternative response team, and what calls are forwarded to over the fire side or to the police, is still trying to work some of those things out, because as we know, the MCOT, they have concerns with safety and can't confirm things, or if there's concerns about weapons involved or something like that, then the information sharing back and forth is still something that Allison and her team are working out. And they're, as the sheriff said, their staffing is at critical levels. I just got an update today that another another person left after 32 years or so. And, you know, they're scrambling. I know they just made some mandatory changes in schedules and overtime mandations. And so that's kind of, I think, industry wide, we're all kind of feeling it.
Thank you, Sheriff Alfo and Lieutenant Cristelli for those updates as well. Dan.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to do this on my phone, which is basically impossible. I bring this up because I think it's important for us to recognize that when it comes to these very important public safety positions, it is largely not a budgetary crisis that we're facing. We're facing a retention crisis and a recruitment crisis. And when we bring these new programs online, which I think that's important that we do with the alternate response team for sure, that we have this is another way to address behavioral health issues as they're emerging in our community, that we recognize that people are not lining up to do these types of jobs in a meaningful way. And whether that's changed from historical trends or that's just kind of the way things are now, I think it's important that we acknowledge that throwing money at these issues is not going to simply solve the problem. That's true when it comes to how we staff our police department, and it's true how we staff our Watcom dispatch center. So I just want to acknowledge that this is traumatizing for the folks that go to work every day and are expected to work long hours. And I will acknowledge that they need to be paid more, in my opinion. So there is that that component with dispatch, but I think largely it's really trying to recruit people to do these very challenging jobs.
Thank you, Dan. Any other discussion on the joint Legal and Justice Systems and Behavioral Health Subcommittee meeting? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on the agenda. Is there any other business?
Stephen, the only thing I wanted to say is we are at the end of the year. Thanks everyone for being here. Stephen and I know you're all very busy. Thanks for the effort this year. And we have a lot next year. Without going into the issues, I think everybody understands there will be something before the voters relating to some kind of facility. We've talked about that. We have the SAC work. We have our work in the Law Justice Council. So we just want to thank you for your efforts, but also highlight there's a lot of substantive work that needs to happen next year, and we appreciate your help with that. And on a personal level, I appreciate everybody wanting, we may have different views of what makes a better system, but everyone here wants a better system. And I know that everybody, well, Steve, I'll speak for Stephen and I think everybody probably really appreciates that level of commitment. And my experience is out of these divergent points of view and different opinions, we ultimately usually end up with something better than if any one person is making a decision. So thanks for all your efforts. And 2023 is around the corner and we'll have a lot to do. You want to add? And Barry's hand is up, Stephen.
I'll echo Jack's appreciation of everyone, especially the willingness to get together on December 19th for a meeting, which was an iffy proposition. I'll also say I'm sorry that not everyone gets to sit in some of the work meetings with consulting groups, Dr. Harris from UW, Pyramid Communications, and some other organizations who are all, to put it in a colloquial way, blown away by the collaboration that goes on in a group like this, far ahead of many jurisdictions, which can't get this many people to the table and can't get them cooperating and seeking consensus and compromise. So it's just an honor for Jack and I to coordinate a group like this doing the work that we do, and thank you to everyone. Barry, your comment?
Yeah, I just want to echo everything. Stephen, you stole my thunder there about the, how effective this group is and how we are leaders nationwide. Some of the travels I did with the MacArthur Foundation over the last few years, it was noted by other communities that Whatcom County is really taken the lead in a lot of our criminal justice work that we're doing here. So I also want to thank everybody for their work this year and buckle up for next year because we're really going to have a lot on our plate. So everybody have a great holiday time with your families, and we will see you next year.
And before we close out, Jack, do you want to take public comment?
Sure, Barry made me smile. I remember like at Park, you were saying like, you'd always tell your friends, see you next year, Christmas break. So see you next year. Made me smile, Barry. I remember that was always like, it'd be a long time. We wished it were longer. All right. Public comment. Jill, would you like to open up public comment? I think we had 6 people last time I looked in there.
Yes, thank you. We do have a number of attendees. If you would like to speak to the task force, please virtually raise your hand online by select raise hand icon, or on the phone, you can press *9. When you're called to speak, please state your full name for the record. And we do have one hand raised from Rupert. Rupert, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rupert Ayton, Ayton. I live in Cordata. I'm a concerned citizen, and I'm just participating, listening to these meetings, trying to get my head around issues of pretrial services and incarceration in the county. I'm a member of the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship's Black Lives Matter Action Ministry Task Force, or team, I guess. And I'm just researching. So I may be reaching out to some of you with questions. I've already reached out to some folks at Superior Court, really trying to get my head around how everything works and the steps that the county's taking to always try and improve it in an effort to combat racism and oppression. Thank you very much for all the work that you do.
Thank you, and thank you for attending, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. You're also, in addition to speaking here, you and anyone can submit any information you think that would be useful to the task force. We have a variety of ways to do that. And I believe we have an email address for that purpose too.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the task force? Please virtually raise your hand. And no additional hands are raised.
All right. Well, seeing no other business, I regret to inform you, we will be adjourning this meeting 20 minutes early. I'm sure none of you had anything else to do today. Anyway, thank you so much. See you next year. And thanks for all your participation.